Welcome to Planting Seeds, Philanthropy in Saskatchewan, a show where we aim to connect you to the community impact that's being powered by donors and charities across the prairies. I'm your host, Victor Roman, with the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation. I hope you enjoy the show. I'm very appreciative to welcome our guests today, joining us from the Phoenix Residential Society. I'm joined here by Sheila Wignes-Paton, who's the Executive Director, as well as Kendra Giles, who's the Director of Program Development and Innovative Housing Programs. I just want to say thank you for joining me today. And is there anything you'd want to let the audience know a bit more about yourselves before I go further?
Well, I've worked at Phoenix for over 30 years, and so I guess you could say it's been my passion to work in a community-based organization like Phoenix.
Great. And how about you, Kendra? How long have you been there?
Not as many years as Sheila, but I have been there 13 years, so I definitely share the same passion, though.
Oh, that's perfect. So I wanted to let the viewers know there's a very specific reason why I invited both of you on the show. And our organization, South Saskatchewan Community Foundation, many of our donors, or some of our donors, regularly fund the Phoenix Residential Society. I know recently have as well. And we took a visit there as an organization, and you told us this really fantastic story about the $1 Million Man and this great case of really how much not only social impact can be made, but how much money can also actually be saved in society at the exact same time that you're doing amazing work. Now, I don't want to jump too far. Before we get into that story, can you let the viewers know a little bit about Phoenix Residential Society and what you do here in the community?
So Phoenix Residential Society operates a lot of programs to support people with different types of challenges and disabilities. Most of our programs are for people with mental health disorders. We also have an acquired brain injury program, and we have our Homes Housing First program that supports people that have been experiencing homelessness. We have over 200 people that we support in those different programs. And our goal is really to help people become as independent as possible and give them the supports to be successful in their lives.
That's incredible. One question I have for you, and I think it would be interesting for the audience to know, is how is an organization like yours funded throughout the year?
So we do receive funding mainly through our provincial government for all of our mental health programs and our acquired brain injury program. Right now, the majority of our funding for our Homes Housing First program comes through the federal government. We also get some charitable donations, and we've been very fortunate to be able to get support from organizations like South Saskatchewan Community Foundation to fund specific projects. So that's how we're funded.
Well, that's great. And with increased funding at your organization, I mean, I know in the charitable sector, there isn't enough money for charities. The reality is it's always trying to do as much as you can with the little resources you have. So what would it look like if donors did pay more attention, if you did see more increased funding from private donors, from corporations? What would that do for your organization and specifically the people you serve?
Well, it certainly would allow us to enhance our existing programs. So, we have really dedicated staff, and we work really hard to provide really good services to our residents and the people we serve. But it would be great to have more funding and offer increased opportunities for social and leisure and I would say more coaching and mentoring. One of the benefits that we see after, when we're working with people is when they get their lives settled and in order, often they want to move on and either volunteer themselves or return to work. So the benefits would be huge. The other thing is there are some real impacts that increased funding would have, and you talked about the savings that can happen to the overall system, and that's where Kendra, I think, can fill in and build on the idea of our story of our $1 Million Man.
Absolutely. There's one thing that you touched on there that resonated with me is when you just talked about that importance of, people that have gotten support, that have received help and have really succeeded and lifted themselves up, often want to find ways to give back and to help those also in need. And the other thing that's powerful about the more kind of mentorship you might be able to do in the future is that those mentors with that lived experience, I know this from hand in hand from being a mentor from a youth previously, is that, the more lived experience that someone has, the more that person's going to actually listen to you and actually believe you. And they can't make that claim that you don't know what I'm going through. It's because it's like, no, you're looking at what could be your future self. There's a lot of inspiration that can happen there. So yeah. I definitely resonate with that.
One of the programs that we're really, really proud of at Phoenix is that we do have a peer support specialist team. And so they are people that are maybe even still in our programs, but they are, reaching out and being that mentor and support. And that program continues to grow and develop within Phoenix. And like I said, it's one of the things that we're really proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk a bit about the economic savings of doing this help. So this is where the story of the $1 Million Man is going to come in. And Kendra, you can probably tell us a lot about this, but to kind of preface this, when we went to Phoenix Residential Society, I can say personally, I didn't have a lot of knowledge of what you did. That was part of the reason why I really wanted to go visit, is to get more of a grasp. Your office is also down the street from where South Saskatchewan Community Foundation's office is. So it's kind of an easy, just like, why don't we just cross the street and see what's up? And the story of the $1 Million Man really opened my eyes, because one of the things that I think often comes up is people feel like they need to choose between the economy and helping people. And right now we're about to go through a case of how you don't have to choose those things. So with that, Kendra, do you want to tell us a bit about what is the $1 Million Man?
Absolutely. So he was an individual that we worked with in our Housing First program. So when we first took him on as a referral, he was the year prior to us starting to work with him, he was known as the $1 Million Man, was kind of his nickname, because he was the most expensive patient in the health region at that time. So initially when we started working with him, we didn't see a huge change in the first little bit, like the first month, because he had been someone that had been on the streets. He told us all of his life. So it had been quite a number of years that he'd been on the streets. So when you're used to living a certain way, we didn't expect or anticipate that was just going to change overnight. So we housed him in February of 2016. So in January of 2016, he had actually been admitted to the emergency department 47 times in that single month. So we looked at, for all of the folks we work with, we look at where their police and health stats are 2 years prior to being housed, and then what that looks like 2 years after being housed. So from 47 in 1 month, in the 2 years after he was housed, he was down to 22 admissions to the emergency department in that entire 2 years. And then in terms of EMS, in the 2 years prior to being housed, he had 335 ambulances. And then post-housing, in the first year, he had 87 still. And then in the second year, he was down to 6.
That's
so
incredible.
In that first year, he was an individual that still had pretty complex health issues. So a lot of them were still warranted things, and he needed to be in the hospital. So we wouldn't have wanted to see it down to 0 anyways. And then in terms of detox admissions, so he was also someone that stayed pretty regularly at detox. In the 2 years pre-housing, he had 557 admissions. And then post-housing, he was down to 38. And then in terms of calls for service and arrests with Regina Police Service, he didn't have as many there. So for arrests, he had 57 and then down to 4 after he was housed. And for calls for service, he had 85 down to 7 after he was housed. And then, so one of the things we use is called a SPDAT, a Service Prioritization Decision Assistance Tool. That is a common assessment tool that's used for folks that are homeless to gauge their level of acuity.
Yeah.
So on that assessment, scores from 0 to 60. And initially when he came to us, he was scoring a 60. And then we worked with him for a number of years. And by the time we transferred him to long-term care, his last SPDAT score was down to a 33. So we had seen almost half of that assessment since his time with us.
That's incredible. And I know you mentioned, because obviously we're looking at, a very high amount of use of police services, of, I'm assuming, ambulance, medical services, hospitals, kind of everything across the board. So you mentioned kind of the name, the $1 Million Man. So how did you figure out kind of how much was being spent in 1 year versus how much less was being spent after he got treatment, after he kind of started to be able to pull himself up a bit more?
So when he first came to us, he was working with a team that was operated by Regina Health Region at the time. So they were the ones that had told us that he was the most expensive patient in the health region. We didn't actually gather that data at that time. We gathered it after he was housed though. And so we had run data on all of the individuals and did the cost analysis. But when you look at like emergency room visits, for example, we just took what the cost of a basic admission is. It didn't include any actual costs of if you needed any tests done, if you needed any of that kind of stuff done. So it was a very base analysis of what the actual cost savings were when we have done them, because we have never been able to access that level of data where you can see like what actually happens once someone's admitted to the emergency, for example. Yeah.
But even with that, you can see that just the cost would have been, I mean, really astronomical when you look at it for one individual. That's an incredible amount of work that needs to be done to kind of keep them afloat. And I guess on that note too, what I would mention is that the work is deserving, and like the person deserves the ability to succeed and the ability to get that care. But it's incredible to know that like the care they really needed wasn't to go to the hospital. The care they really needed is what the services you were able to provide. And clearly through the services you've been able to provide in this really high, really, I don't know what the right word would be, but it's almost like a pinnacle of the challenge, I guess. And when you say it hits that, was it 60? Was the highest, and you're right at the peak? It's like, well, how far can we pull that down? And it's like, and if that is by half, it's like that right there is showing a really strong case of just like how not only socially responsible this is, but also economically responsible at the exact same time. And just this idea that it's like, having people be healthier is probably gonna long-term mean, for one, like you say, police services won't be needed as much. The hospital hopefully won't be needed as much. Depending on the situation, might be someone that might be in a situation where they can reach employment again, things like that. Like there's a whole shift that can really happen, but restorative work is really the key piece to that for sure. Is there anything else you wanted to kind of talk about him? I had some other questions as well that are coming in my mind as we're talking here.
I think just to add to not only the cost savings, but his quality of life, the vast improvement we saw from, like he was an individual, you would drive down the street and you might see him passed out at the bus stop on a daily basis. After he was also someone that used daily non-beverage alcohol. By the time he was discharged from us, he rarely touched alcohol at all and never any non-beverage alcohol, but maybe a couple times a month he would have some wine or something fancy. But he typically was drinking coffee and, well, he called it his coffee tea, a mix of coffee and tea. But he had a place to be able to do that in. And he would come to our office most days just to visit, and he loved playing chess. And but those weren't things that he got to partake in when he was living on the streets. So just to see the kind of improvement in the quality of his life was pretty amazing over the years.
You said something there that just sparked a question, which was, you mentioned that he was able to kind of come visit you and do these things and keep his quality of life going. Is that pretty common when someone's not admitted, that they'll still have the space to visit, to partake in different ways? Like what does it look like, I guess, for someone that, and maybe this is just me not understanding properly, so you correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that you have spaces to fill within there where you'll have residents. When someone isn't a resident, is it still pretty easy for them to come by to access kind of baseline services, or what does that look like?
Most of the groups and programming are only accessible for folks in the program.
Okay.
We actually have a new harm reduction worker position that runs groups that are open to anyone in the community. So those ones are accessible. Other than that, we don't generally turn people away though, like in the homes program, especially if there's groups or things going on and people are in the office and want to partake, they do partake. But typically for most groups and any programming is for the residents that are in the programming, because we don't quite have capacity to accommodate everyone. So
I'd like to add to that though, in terms of we often, though, with people that have graduated from especially our mental health programs, they do like to stop in and keep in touch. And we had just a wonderful visit a little while ago of someone that was in our original group home. So Phoenix started off as just a group home for 10 individuals. And that's, many years ago. And as I said, we've grown now to, 7 different programs. And this individual had been in Phoenix House back in the 80s. And he had a bachelor degree in fine arts while he was with us. And then he spent a couple of years, moved on and moved to Edmonton and is now quite a successful artist. And he was going to be back in Regina doing a talk at the U of R. And he made a point of coming back to Phoenix and saying, I just want to thank you for all of the support that I got back. And this, like I said, this was in the 1980s that he was with us. So, those kind of stories are really heartwarming when, people let us know, that we have made an impact on their lives.
That's awesome. And yeah, I know, and I don't know if this is, obviously in this case, it's true that you were able to see that future impact, but I feel like sometimes it's kind of tricky when you're doing different charity work, because you're doing the work kind of in crisis mode, in trauma mode, right on the ground. And when someone doesn't need you, you don't get to see them every day. So sometimes you don't actually know. It's like, well, what happened to that person that was with us and moved across the country? I hope they're doing okay. I wonder if they're doing okay. So it's really nice to see that there are those cases where you get that kind of confirmation that, like this is something that can for sure work long term. I noticed on your website that you have a section for recovery stories. I'm not sure if this one's on there or not specifically, but that's just maybe something I'd let the viewers know, is if you did want to learn more, see some of these stories from Phoenix Residential Society, you can go to phoenixregina.com and just hit the recovery stories tab and learn more about the organization, anything like that. When it comes to, I guess, the quote unquote $1 million man is one example. It's a very high needs example, probably the highest needs example is what my assumption would be. What was your capacity like to serve him? And like, let's say that there was 10 people that needed that amount of that level of help, or 20 or 30 or 100, I don't know what that number is. What's your capacity to help when a lot of people need that sort of help?
We unfortunately don't have, we have pretty small caseloads, or we have always had pretty small caseloads. We have, in that program in particular, we have, I think, 13 full-time staff, and then we have about 40 part-time casual staff as well. But our caseloads have historically been about 1 to 7 per case manager, because they do require a pretty intensive amount of support. Some people are seen up to 3 times a day, every single day. So we run 7 days a week. And so if they do require that level of support, which particularly those that score 60 on that assessment often do, we we have always offered that level of support in order to be able to help and give them the support they need. Whereas if we had really high caseloads and we're only getting to see people once a week, we wouldn't be seeing that kind of change that we do see in those folks. So yeah, we've always kept caseloads small so that we can help people that really need it. Unfortunately, that does come at a cost of the fact that there is plenty of other people that still need that help. But
And it is really dependent on our funding and our capacity. We, and all of our programs, so both the mental health program and our homes program and our mental health programs and acquired brain injury programs, we all have a wait list for all of those programs. Not dozens of people, but there are always people waiting in the wings. And one of the things that for a lot of our programs, though, is that we work with people as long as they need it. So it's not that there's a lot of openings. There are, and we are always bringing new people in. There, like I said, there's limits to our funding and limits to our capacity.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I appreciate the fact that you're not willing to compromise on the fact that these people need a lot of help individually, instead of saying, hey, caseworker who is really focused on one really hard case or one really challenging situation to help somebody, to say, now do it to two people at the same time. Because I know the reality there is what's going to happen is that both those people are going to be getting less support, but also that worker is just going to be getting double burnt out, double stresses, double the work, right? So I guess where I was wondering with that was, is the capacity and the funding sufficient? I think what's very, I'd say regular for most charitable organizations is that if you had more money, your capacity would go up, and there usually is a wait list. There are people that could use these services. So that might be a reason why someone might want to look to get involved with an organization like yours, is to really make that strong one-on-one impact, that potential to, get someone's really not only, there's a selfless and a selfless aspect to this. It's like someone's not going to need to use that hospital bed more days or more times than there are days in the month, right? Which also means that when someone else needs the hospital, there's more capacity there too. It's really freeing up a lot of capacities beyond just dollars. It bleeds into like society as it's formed as a whole when you really look at it, as far as how helping these people that need the help the most can turn them into helpers later in life, can also free up space for the police, for the hospitals to help people the way they need to as well, without needing to expand their capacity. So there's a lot of, I would argue that if you're able to expand the capacity really at the core of the issue that you guys are able to work with and really help people get through the challenges they have, that you're freeing up the capacity of a lot of things around you as well. So that's one thing that might be hard to visualize, but that I think people can really keep in mind, is that, the more is done at the, not to quote our name, but at the seed of the problem, the less that problem is going to grow, and the less there's going to be to have to take care of after the fact. And this is something that, and I can't remember if I'm remembering this fully, but when we talked before, I remember talking a little bit about how even there's some people that are waiting for like punitive justice. I don't know if it's care or appointments or what the right word is, but sometimes for capacity reasons on their end, they've ended up at you, and how it's actually ended up being a restorative process. Is there anything you'd be able to kind of touch on that? Not to put you on the spot, but I remember us talking briefly about that before.
I think what that would be is that, there are some of our individuals that do get involved with justice, and they may be going through something like the drug treatment court, and that's a really good option to divert people into getting supports in the community. And I think we do have some of our mental health clients that ended up in that drug treatment court and get diverted, and that we're providing supports and services to them.
I think that's what I think that is what you had touched on, what I was trying to remember at least. And what I loved about that is just, it is really, it's nice to see that there was restorative means that I think I didn't even realize existed in our community before talking to you about some of this work. So it's all just like very, very fascinating to me. And I know our time's coming to a close here pretty quick. So we'll wrap it up right away. But I just wanted to give really a big thanks to the work you're doing in the community. And I know us at SSCF and our funders really appreciate the fact that we're able to contribute what we can dollars-wise to you. And we know, one thing I can let you know and the audience know is that the reality is every time we put out a competitive grant, the amount of applications coming in is higher and higher and higher. So the charitable needs, especially coming out of the pandemic, are higher and higher and higher. So I would really just urge viewers to think, if you can give back to community now, and I know it's a challenging time economically in 2023, but the need is there more than ever. And I just wanted to say thank you again for joining us today and being here.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you'd like to learn more about how you can make an impact in your own community, visit the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation online at sscf.ca or find us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn.